My name is Melissa Hart. I am 32 years old, and for 7 years I have styled hair at a small salon called Bloom & Co. on Birchwood Avenue in Cedarville, a chair I built up client by client after my mother passed and left me just enough money to buy into the lease. Until one gray afternoon in late October, I believe my husband Ethan and I were building a life together, the same steady way we always had. I found out otherwise while doing his laundry. It was nothing dramatic at first, just a folded receipt that fell out of his work jacket pocket when I shook it out before tossing it in the wash. I almost threw it away without looking, the way you throw away 100 receipts a year without a second thought. But this one had a hardware store logo I didn't recognize, from a town 2 hours north called Ashworth, and a total that made me stop mid-motion. $11,200 paid in full, dated 3 weeks earlier, the same weekend Ethan had told me he was at a fishing trip with his brother. I stood in our laundry room holding that piece of paper for a long time, turning it over like it might explain itself if I looked at it long enough. Ethan didn't fish. He'd gone twice in the 5 years we'd been married, both times complaining the whole drive there. $11,000 was not a fishing trip. It was a foundation or a roof or cabinets or something built to last. If you're new here, stay with me, because what I uncovered over the next month reached far beyond a receipt and touched a part of my life I didn't even know had been quietly taken from me years earlier. I didn't say anything to Ethan that night. I made dinner the way I always did, listened to him talk about a difficult client at the auto shop where he worked as a service manager, and I said nothing because some part of me, the part that has spent 7 years learning to read the truth in the way a client avoids my eyes in the mirror when they're about to lie about how often they actually brush their hair, understood I needed more than a receipt before I said a word out loud. I called my cousin Denise the next morning before opening the salon. Denise works as a title examiner at a real estate office 2 towns over, and she has the particular skill of finding property records the way other people find parking spots, quickly and without much effort at all. "Ashworth," she said, when I told her the name on the receipt. "That's not far from where your dad's land is. You still own that, right? The lake parcel." I hadn't thought about the lake parcel in months. My father had left me 11 acres outside Ashworth when he died 6 years earlier, land that had been in his family for 2 generations, mostly wooded, undeveloped, worth something on paper, but nothing we'd ever needed to touch. Ethan had handled the paperwork on it after Dad passed, since I was still grieving, and he'd offered to deal with the county records and the property taxes so I wouldn't have to think about it. I had signed whatever he put in front of me at the time, trusting him the way you trust someone who says he's only trying to make things easier for you. "Let me check something," Denise said, and she called me back 40 minutes later, her voice careful in a way I'd never heard from her before. "Melissa, I need you to sit down." The lake parcel, according to the county records Denise pulled that morning, was no longer solely in my name. 4 months earlier, a quitclaim deed had been filed adding a second owner, Ethan Cross, my husband. And that same document referenced a durable power of attorney, filed the year my father died, that Ethan had apparently used to add himself to the deed, without ever mentioning it to me at all. I remembered signing something back then. A folder of papers Ethan had brought home from the county office, telling me it was just standard estate paperwork. Nothing to worry about. He'd walk me through it later if I had questions. I never had questions. I trusted him completely, and grief has a way of making you sign things without reading every line, because reading every line means facing every detail of what you've lost. "There's more," Denise said. "A building permit was pulled on that parcel 2 months ago, residential construction, and the permit application lists a second name as project co-owner, someone named Chloe Bennett." I did not recognize the name Chloe Bennett. I had never heard Ethan mention her once. I searched the name that afternoon, sitting in my car in the salon parking lot on my lunch break, and a social media profile came up almost immediately. A woman around my age, blonde, where I was dark-haired, a profile full of photos tagged at what looked like a construction site, framed walls rising out of cleared woodland, a caption from 6 weeks earlier that read, "Building our forever home 1 weekend at a time," with a heart emoji and a tag. Ethan Cross. I scrolled through months of posts. Every single trip Ethan had told me was a guy's weekend, a fishing trip, a work conference lined up exactly with dates in Chloe Bennett's photos, framing going up, windows being installed, a kitchen island delivered, and in a photo from 3 weeks earlier, the same weekend as the hardware store receipt, Ethan stood in the unfinished frame of a house, my father's trees still visible through the open wall behind him, his arm around Chloe's waist, both of them laughing at something outside the frame. He was building a house on my father's land with another woman, using a power of attorney he was never supposed to use for anything beyond settling my father's estate. I did not confront him that night or the next. I drove home, made dinner, sat across from him at our kitchen table while he talked about his day, and I said nothing because I needed to understand the whole shape of what had happened before I said a single word. I called Denise back the following morning and asked her who I should talk to. She recommended an estate attorney named Carla Winters, someone she'd worked with on property disputes before, practicing out of a small office above the pharmacy downtown. Carla listened to the entire account without interrupting once. The patient, careful listening of someone who has heard 100 versions of betrayal and still takes every single one seriously. "The power of attorney your husband used," she said when I finished, "was almost certainly limited to settling your father's estate. If it was used afterward to add himself to a deed for property that belonged solely to you, that's not a gray area. That's a breach of fiduciary duty, and depending on how the paperwork was structured, it could rise to outright fraud. But I want documentation before we move on anything, every filing, every date, every signature." She brought in a title specialist named Robert Nguyen, a meticulous man who reminded me of my father in the careful, unhurried way he handled every document, checking it twice before trusting it once. Over the following 2 weeks, while I moved through my days exactly as always, cutting hair, laughing with regular clients, going home to sit across the table from a man I now watched like a stranger, Robert built a complete picture. The quitclaim deed had been filed using my forged signature, not the power of attorney at all, which made everything considerably worse than Carla had first suspected. Robert compared the signature on the county filing against 3 other documents I had genuinely signed over the years: mortgage paperwork, tax forms, our marriage certificate, and the difference, once he laid them side by side, was unmistakable. Close, careful, clearly practiced, but not mine. "Someone spent time getting this right," Robert said quietly, sliding the comparison across Carla's desk. "This isn't a rushed forgery. This is someone who studied your handwriting." I sat with that for a long time. Not the affair, which somehow felt almost simple by comparison, a wound with a clean, understandable edge. This was different. This was my husband sitting beside me at our kitchen table, night after night, while secretly forging my name onto a deed for land my father had left me, to build a life with another woman on the one piece of ground that still connected me to him. It was during that same stretch of quiet, careful digging that something else surfaced, something that had nothing to do with money or land at all, and that ended up cutting almost as deep. I had gone looking through an old filing box in our hall closet for my father's original will, thinking it might help Robert confirm the estate paperwork was legitimate before it was tampered with. Instead, tucked behind tax returns and old insurance forms, I found a small bundle of unopened envelopes, held together with a rubber band gone brittle with age, all addressed to me, all from the same return address in a town 3 states away, all from a man named Walter Hart, my father's older brother, my uncle. I hadn't spoken to Walter since I was a teenager, since a falling out between him and my father over their own parents' estate that neither of them ever fully explained to me, a rift that hardened over the years into silence. After my father died, I remembered wondering, briefly, whether Walter even knew, whether anyone had told him. Ethan had assured me, gently, that he'd reached out, that Walter had said he needed space, that it was better not to push. I had accepted that answer the way I accepted most things that year, too raw with grief to question anything handed to me with a sympathetic voice. There were 9 envelopes. The earliest was postmarked 5 months after my father's funeral. The most recent was from just under a year ago. Every single one, unopened, hidden behind old paperwork in a closet Ethan knew I rarely touched. I opened the oldest one first, sitting on the closet floor with the filing box still open beside me. Walter's handwriting was careful, old-fashioned, slightly shaky in places. Melissa, I am so sorry for your loss and for the years of silence between your father and me. I should have called years ago. I would very much like to know you, if you're willing. I think about you more than you'd probably guess. Please call any time, day or night. Uncle Walter. I opened the rest, one by one, my hands unsteady by the third, each one gentler than the last, none of them angry, none of them demanding anything, just a man trying again and again to reach the only family he had left, met with silence he had no way of knowing wasn't mine. I understood sitting there that Ethan had not simply failed to pass along a message. He had intercepted actual letters, physical mail addressed to me, and hidden every one of them, for reasons I couldn't yet explain, but that fit a pattern I was only beginning to see clearly. A man who wanted me isolated, who wanted to be my only remaining tie to my father's memory, who had perhaps understood, even before I did, that a woman with no one else to call might be easier to quietly maneuver around. I called Denise that night, my voice unsteady in a way it hadn't been even over the deed. She was quiet for a long moment. "That's not carelessness, Melissa," she finally said. "That's control." I did not call Walter that night. I needed to finish understanding everything else first, needed to hold both truths in my hands at the same time before I decided how to move through either of them. But I kept his letters on my nightstand from that point forward, the way you keep something you intend to come back to. Carla was firm about the property matter regardless. If you confront him now, he has time to find a lawyer, backdate something, or claim the signature discrepancy as a clerical error. We build the case first, quietly. Then you decide how you want the truth to come out. I found out, almost by accident, that Chloe Bennett had scheduled a housewarming for the new house in 3 weeks, an open house of sorts for friends and family, the finishing touches on the build timed around it. I learned this because Chloe's social media account was public, and her excitement was, apparently, impossible to contain. She had posted a countdown graphic. 3 weeks until we open our door to everyone we love. Carla agreed it was the right moment. If they're planning to introduce this as a finished, legitimate life in front of witnesses, correcting the record privately beforehand just gives them room to manage the story before anyone else hears the truth. The strongest place to set this right is in front of the people they're trying to convince. So I waited. 3 weeks of the strangest life I have ever lived. Smiling through client conversations at the salon, going home each evening to a husband who talked about weekend plans without ever once mentioning whose house he was finishing or whose land it was built on. He noticed I'd grown quieter. He asked twice if everything was all right. I told him work had been heavy, which wasn't even a lie, just not the whole truth. In the middle of those 3 weeks, on a Sunday evening when Ethan was out, supposedly picking up supplies, I finally called the number on Walter's most recent letter. He picked up on the 4th ring, and when I said my name, there was a long pause on the line, the sound of a man setting something down carefully. "Melissa," he said, "I've thought about hanging up on this number so many times, thinking I'd finally accepted you weren't going to call. I'm glad I never did." I told him carefully that I had only just found his letters, hidden away, unopened, for years. He was quiet again. And when he spoke, his voice had gone rougher. "I wrote to your husband, too, once, early on. Asked him plainly whether you'd received anything from me, whether I should try a different way of reaching you. He told me you needed time, that pushing would only make things harder on you. I believed him. I'm so sorry I believed him." We talked for almost 2 hours that night, about my father, about their falling out years ago over a house that no longer even existed, about small things, the sound of my father's laugh, a fishing cabin they'd shared as boys on a lake not far, it turned out, from the very parcel of land Ethan was now quietly building on. Walter had never once known the two things were connected until I told him, and his silence on the line told me he was doing the same math I had already done, that the land Ethan had forged his way onto was the same stretch of shoreline Walter and my father had once shared as children before everything between them went quiet. I didn't tell Ethan about the call. I didn't tell him about the letters at all. Some things, I decided, deserved to stay entirely mine until I was ready to use them, and this one wasn't a weapon, it was simply something I had gotten back. The housewarming took place on a clear, cold Saturday in mid-November, string lights already strung along the new porch railing, when Carla, Robert, Denise, and I pulled up the long gravel drive that used to lead to nothing but my father's quiet trees. Cars lined both sides of the road. Through the front windows, I could see people moving inside with drinks in their hands, the kind of warm, golden light that makes a house look like it has always belonged to whoever is standing in it. I did not go in during the early part of the gathering. We waited deliberately until the small crowd had settled, until Ethan and Chloe were standing together near the stone fireplace, being toasted by a small cluster of guests. Chloe's hand resting on Ethan's arm, the way a wife's hand rests on her husband's arm at a party thrown in their own home. I walked in through the front door, which no one had thought to lock, because no one there imagined the actual owner of the land beneath their feet might simply walk through it. The room noticed me before Ethan did. A few guests turned, confused, then increasingly uneasy, as they registered a woman none of them recognized, walking calmly through a housewarming she clearly hadn't been invited to. Ethan saw me and his face moved through recognition, then something close to panic, in under 2 seconds. "Melissa," he said, setting his glass down too quickly, some of it sloshing over his hand. "What are you doing here?" "This is my land, Ethan," I said. "I think that's a reasonable question for me to be asking you." Chloe's smile faltered, then dissolved entirely. "I'm sorry, who is this?" "I'm his wife," I said, and my voice came out steadier than I expected. "We're still married. I imagine he didn't mention that part while he was showing you the property lines." Carla stepped up beside me, calm and unhurried, a folder already open in her hands. "My name is Carla Winters. I'm Melissa Hart's attorney. Before this evening continues, there's something everyone here deserves to know." The room's noise dropped to almost nothing. Somewhere near the kitchen, a bottle stopped mid-pour. "This property," Carla continued, her voice carrying easily without ever rising, "was inherited solely by Melissa from her late father 6 years ago. 4 months ago, a deed was filed, adding a second owner using a signature that does not match any of Melissa's verified handwriting samples on record with the county." "That's not what happened," Ethan said, too fast, too loud. "Melissa knew about this. We talked about building here together years ago before things changed between us." "We never talked about building anything here," I said. "You told me you were handling paperwork for my father's estate. You never once mentioned a construction permit or a second name on the deed or her." I looked at Chloe, who had gone very pale, her hand slipping off Ethan's arm as though it had suddenly gone cold. "Did he tell you this land was his?" Chloe didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her face already had. Robert stepped forward and laid a short stack of documents on the nearest table, beside a tray of untouched appetizers. "These are the original deed records showing sole ownership under Melissa Hart," he said plainly. "This is the quitclaim filing from 4 months ago, and this is a forensic handwriting comparison showing the signature on that filing does not match 3 independently verified samples of Melissa's actual signature." Ethan's face had gone the color of drywall dust. "This is a private matter," he said, glancing around at the guests who had gone very still, phones now quietly coming out of pockets. "This doesn't need to happen here in front of everyone. You didn't seem to think privacy mattered when you were pulling permits in my name on my father's land," I said. "You didn't seem to think it mattered when you practiced my signature enough to forge it onto a county filing." I paused and let the next part land the way it deserved to. "And you didn't think it mattered when you told my own uncle for years that I needed space, so he'd stop trying to reach me while you hid every single letter he ever sent." The room shifted again, a different kind of stillness settling over it, the particular quiet of people realizing a betrayal has more than one shape. Ethan's jaw tightened. That wasn't about the land. No, I agreed. It wasn't. That was just about making sure I had no one else to call. I found 9 unopened letters in our hall closet, Ethan. I called him myself 3 weeks ago. We talked for 2 hours. I looked at him steadily. You didn't just take land that wasn't yours. You spent years making sure I didn't have anyone who might have asked the right questions sooner. Chloe finally spoke, her voice small. You told me her name wasn't even on the deed anymore. You told me the divorce was already filed. Ethan didn't answer her either. He stood there between us, saying nothing, which told both of us everything we needed to know. I did not raise my voice again. I didn't need to. Carla informed both of them, plainly, that formal legal notice would be delivered within the week regarding the forged deed, the fraudulent power of attorney use, and the unpermitted construction now sitting on land that remained, and always had remained, solely mine. Then she turned to me, and we walked back out through the front door together, past the string lights on the porch and the cars still lining the gravel drive, out into the cold, clear night. The forgery complaint moved through the county recorder's office within the month, the deed corrected, sole ownership restored to my name exactly as it had always legally been, regardless of what paper Ethan had once filed behind my back. The unpermitted portions of the construction, half finished as it was, became a legal liability entirely his own to untangle, since I made clear through Carla that I had no intention of ever authorizing its completion. Chloe moved out of the half-built house within weeks, according to Denise, who still hears things through the title office grapevine, the way small towns always manage to keep everyone informed. Ethan and I finalized our divorce in March. Carla built the case cleanly enough that the settlement moved quickly, the fraud documentation making any real dispute nearly impossible. I asked for exactly what the law said was already mine, nothing more, because I had already taken back the only thing that actually mattered, which was the truth, spoken plainly in the one place he never expected to hear it. Ethan tried to reach me twice after everything was finalized, once through a long email I read once and never answered. Once in person, standing outside the salon on a rainy afternoon in April, asking if there was anything he could have said that would have made any of it different. I thought about the question honestly, the way I think about most things now, slowly, without rushing toward an answer just to end a conversation. If you'd told me you wanted to build a life somewhere else with someone else, I would have been devastated, I told him. But I would have listened because 5 years should have earned you that much honesty in return. What I can't forgive is that you practiced my signature until you could forge it and used my father's memory to do it. And I especially can't forgive that you decided which family I was allowed to keep. He didn't have an answer for that. He rarely did by the end. I still cut hair every day at Bloom & Co. under the same sign that's hung there since before my mother got sick. Denise comes by every few weeks with an update on the property, which sits quiet again now, the half-finished frame slowly being cleared by a contractor I hired myself, someone who asks me what I actually want built there, if anything, instead of deciding for me. Walter drove down for the first time in early spring, 6 years of silence collapsing into a single long afternoon on my porch, going through old photographs I hadn't looked at since the funeral. Him telling me stories about my father as a boy that I had never once heard. My father teaching a much younger Walter to skip stones on the very lake I could now see from my own front steps. He brought a small wooden box with him that afternoon, worn at the corners, the hinges stiff from disuse. Inside were letters of a different kind, ones written decades earlier, between him and my father as young men, before whatever falling out had come between them, before either of them had children or mortgages or reasons to stay quiet. I read through them slowly while Walter sat beside me on the porch steps, not saying much, just letting me have the time I needed with 2 brothers. I was only now beginning to understand had once been close in a way I'd never witnessed. He talked about you all the time when you were small, Walter said at one point, watching the lake instead of me, the way people do when a memory is easier to share sideways than head on. Called you his stubborn little surveyor because you used to walk the property line with him every summer, insisting on knowing exactly where it started and stopped. I used to tease him that you'd grow up to fight anyone who tried to take an inch of it. I hadn't remembered that. Not clearly, but sitting there it came back in pieces, small hands gripping a walking stick, my father pointing out a boundary marker half sunk into the dirt, telling me some things are worth knowing the edges of. I understood hearing it, that some part of me had been walking that same line my entire life without realizing it, and that the version of me who finally stood in a stranger's living room with a folder of forged documents wasn't really new at all. She had just been waiting. We talk every Sunday now, Walter and I, sometimes for 20 minutes, sometimes for 2 hours, filling in decades I hadn't even known were missing until the letters showed me the shape of the gap. He's already asked, half joking, whether I'd ever consider building something small out there myself someday, something that actually belongs to the family it was meant for, maybe even something we build together, the way he and my father once talked about doing before life and distance and whatever old argument neither of them ever fully explained got in the way. I told him I wasn't in any hurry. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I didn't feel like I needed to rush toward anything just to prove I could still build a life. The land would still be there, so now would he. Some evenings, after the last client leaves, I drive out to the lake parcel just to stand among my father's trees, the ones still standing at the edges where the clearing never reached. I think about how close I came to losing that ground entirely without ever knowing it was slipping away, one quiet forged signature at a time, and how close I came to losing an uncle I never even knew was reaching for me, one hidden letter at a time. I think about how loudly the truth finally spoke, on both fronts, once I made sure it reached more than just me. I did not win anything that Saturday night beyond what had always been mine, but I found something steadier than winning, which is the plain, ordinary fact of standing on my own land, under my own name, with an uncle's phone call to look forward to every Sunday, answering to no one but myself. That, it turns out, was worth more than anything he ever tried to take.
Thank you so much for watching. Drop a comment below, hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next one.